Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us Bob Scipio, who is the CEO of Skyland Analytics. Welcome to the program, Bob.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, so get us started with giving a little bit of your background and what led you to start Skyland Analytics, and a little bit of the overview that way.
Good, thank you. Skyland Analytics provides consulting and software to the life science industry. We help drug and device manufacturers make higher quality products while remaining compliant with the voluminous number of FDA and emerging SEC regulations that apply to them. My background was as a tax attorney with PwC and then later corporate law, and then I was the general counsel of two biotech companies where I became very familiar with the regulations related to manufacturing as I moved into commercial roles, and I was recruited to run a software company, Aegis Analytical, which was the first company to help manufacturers remain compliant by providing them an analytics tool that would look across all of their production systems and help them with process improvement, process monitoring, quality control, deviation investigations, etc. And that company was located in Lafayette, Colorado. It was sold about 4 years ago, and about a year and a half ago, I put together 6 of us from Aegis, and we formed Skyland Analytics. And we're now working out of Niwot, Colorado, in a newly renovated office here.
Neat. And I know that compliance in any industry is a kind of a term that makes the pit of your stomach kind of tense up because it's so legal and binding and confusing. So when I hear you describe that coming out of your background, and if I were to ask if some life science industry entity was getting ready to move into a new direction, what's one thing that they need to keep in mind regarding compliance to make sure that they're doing things right before they even begin?
Well, there's a lot of things they need to do to get started to launch a device or drug, and we don't focus on the research and the mechanism of action in the body and the clinical trial management and the appropriate dosing for patients. But what we focus on is once those approvals are received, we focus on how to keep them compliant or get compliant in their manufacturing. And one of the regulations we focus on is the FDA's mandate that they control their process wherever that takes place. And for many companies that are emerging, they get funding for the R&D and the clinical trial, but they don't typically get funding to build their own plant. So emerging new companies with great drugs will rely on a contract manufacturer to make that product. But the FDA rule regarding process control stands, and you have to somehow figure out the business and legal aspects of the relationship such that you as a drug owner or a product sponsor still have control of the process. So that's the hurdle we help the new companies with. But the large companies that have run out of space, they have the same issue. Many of these large companies have over 100 contract manufacturers. So little companies and large companies still have the same issue. How do you control a process that's remote? So.
Well, I could imagine that even from the small company that has, whether you want to call it like in the industry co-packer, but a manufacturer that is not yours, you're using their facilities and they're doing the work for you. I would imagine that there is some type of breakdown where they say, here's how we do it, and the company say, no, here's how you have to do it. And if that company, that manufacturing entity is working for many different people in different industries, it might be a problem with their process. So do you find that you need a manufacturer that works specifically in that type of industry so that they understand?
Right. And there are a lot of smart people that are very concerned about health. So they are not willingly going to just any manufacturer. There are manufacturers that specialize in certain aspects of drug production. So let's talk about pharmaceutical. Traditional pharmaceutical involves a lot of dry chemistry and tableting and granulation and so forth. Biologic drugs are maybe large proteins. They can be wet slurries of living organisms that ultimately will have a beneficial effect on the body, but those are two very different types of production systems. So there are companies that do dry tableting and granulation and will do the finishing and packaging. There are other companies that will grow a cell, and then you'll add other ingredients to that, and then there'll be special finishing and packaging for that. So most of the companies find someone that's very, very compatible. And then if there are issues, fine-tuning what you do in a process or how you might package, those are things that they typically can wrestle with. And some of that we can help them with. What we primarily focus on is ways that the drug owner can keep visibility and control in the process while balancing intellectual property issues as well, because sometimes the contract manufacturers do a lot to stabilize, enhance the process, improve the yields and the quality. And what we try to balance is the visibility that a drug owner needs to stay compliant with the economic investment that a contract manufacturer might make to improve the process and make it better. So we help as an advocate for one side or the other.
Yeah, that sounds like balance is such the key word there. And, it makes me think, too, of, the old saying, you don't know what you don't know. So how are you able to help companies who may or may not know they even have risks?
Right. So these contracts are typically 100 pages of legal and business terms, and there's a wide array of approaches to how these contracts get settled. Typically, there is a template that's generated by a lawyer, either on the contract manufacturing side or on the drug owner or device owner side. And then business people fill in blanks and they try to negotiate. What we have found is that because we've all become in our occupation so specialized, a scientist may not be thinking about the IT systems necessary to bring back data to the drug owner. The lawyer may not be thinking of all of the reports and the timeliness of notices and the timeliness for batch records and production reports to be released. And what we have found is that because sometimes these documents can be over-lawyered, we have seen more often that business people may choose to not use a lawyer, and they come to a business agreement, and they may be forgetting or omitting critical provisions in the agreement. We recently read documents that had taken several months to prepare and over $100,000 in legal fees. And my team here, I'm a lawyer, but really consider myself to be a business guy with a law degree because I've been in the business side of this for 17 years. Our risk people and our quality people and I went through those agreements, and we found about a dozen mild to moderate deficiencies. And this is a law firm that arguably is the number one global firm. And they wrote great indemnity provisions, but they were missing things like the timeliness of notices. There were no specimen reports of what the drug owner would receive from the contract manufacturer. The hurdles and requirements for the contract manufacturer related to risk were omitted. Some significant things. So we went and provided them not legal language, but we raised the issues and then we leave it back to the lawyers to settle on language that would address issues that were not being covered by the agreement. So that's one way we do it. The other thing we do is we help companies with the data systems that will generate the necessary reports and data for both sides to remain compliant. And those data systems should provide some transparency back to the drug owner so they can, sometime down the future, they could transfer the process to another contract manufacturer or start a second production line, either in-house or with a third party. They can also help the contract manufacturer troubleshoot if there's a deviation or a failure in a process. So we look at it very holistically, from the contract design to data visibility to the IT systems. And we also help companies select software that will do that, and we can install some of these software products as well. Our history was as a software company that provided analytics to this market. And so we're still doing that, providing not only our old company software, the Discoverant software system, but also other systems that are out there from a lot of small and large vendors that can get the job done. So we're agnostic now in terms of what we would select and install for the customer.
Yeah, just whatever gets the job done to protect and support the client.
Right.
So in your example about the legal agreement that you noticed some items, and again, excellent explanation of, we can't give you the legal advice, but we can point out some observations and can you take these back to your legal counsel? But what if you had not caught a few of those specific items? What could that have cost the client if something had cropped up? Would there have been some potential hard cost where you literally are able to look for some kind of holes in the bucket?
Right. So oftentimes these things have dramatic effects. Or what I'll say is that when there is an issue, it can be dramatic. There are many times when people can work out agreements, or maybe the lack of transparency is never disclosed or never becomes a problem, because if the product and the production system works, everyone's happy. But when there's issues, that's when you can go back to the contract and people will say, hey, I didn't have a right to this, or you didn't have the ability to do that. So here are some examples of contracts that cause some issues for public companies. So there's a global company that's U.S.-based that had a contract manufacturer in Europe, and they wanted to do some troubleshooting on that process along with the contract manufacturer. And one of the things they wanted to do is to have us install data management and data analytics software at the European facility. And the contract manufacturer said, no, you don't have a right to install any software, and we're not giving you all the data because we own the data. And we own the process enhancements, and in fact, we're filing intellectual property on these improvements that we make. And so the U.S. company was faced with a drug that was distributed globally, where they made the drug in the U.S. on a couple different production lines of their own. But the facility in Europe was starting to have different characteristics because they were enhancing it, and actually both parties acknowledged that they were doing a great job with it, but occasionally there would be a failure, and the U.S. company was losing the visibility and control that the FDA desires. And they were also losing the ability to maybe take advantage of the enhancement that the contract manufacturer was achieving. And so the U.S. company asked us to review the contract, and in fact, in our review, we saw that the U.S. company did not have the rights to the data, had no right to put our software in, so there was a lost opportunity for us to to make some revenue on that, but mostly to help them remain compliant. And it was never resolved. This European company is very, very savvy. The way they write agreements is that when a company brings them a process, they will own all the enhancements, and they're very, very good at that, and they're filing patents in the sector. And in the biologics area, the ability of a contract manufacturer to own all of those enhancements will have some value down the road, because when the patent expires on that biologic drug and the contract manufacturer will have enhanced it and improved it, they will be making what we call in the industry a bio-better, not a biosimilar or a generic that you hear about, but a bio-better. They will have stabilized that process for 5 or 10 years, and in fact, they may be the only company that makes that drug. So if you have an emerging company in Boulder or Denver, and they never make the commercial quantities, and they use a contract manufacturer, when the patent expires down the road, that contract manufacturer may be the only entity that knows how to make that drug. And if it's a wild success, then the new company or the large company may lose the ability to make it. And so it's really important that the companies actually consider the intellectual property ramifications of the agreements. There's another.
Yeah, that's really an interesting bird's eye view of that process, because it's kind of like nobody thinks of a certain idea until you get it started, and then it's, kind of like the minimum viable product, and then it starts getting a little bit better and a little bit better, and then all of a sudden, 3 iterations later, it's like, yeah, that's what the public needs, or this is what'll make whatever work. Well, if that scenario you described, here's this contract manufacturer who's doing all the polish and the add-ons and taking the benefit of the improvements because they're seeing how things are working in the real world, and if you didn't have yourself protected, you're the one losing out.
Well, good. You've captured the essence of that particular issue, Mike. And another one that's related to this is, let's say you have a really savvy drug owner and they're great at the contract. They own all the enhancements, no matter what the contract manufacturer does, and they own all the data. But the small contract manufacturer may not have the data system that is enabling both parties to see the data. So now you have an issue where in certain categories of drugs, we're running out of space. And so the issue is the big guys and the little guys may be going to contract manufacturers that may not have state-of-the-art systems. And then you get into an issue of who should pay for the investment. And in many cases, the large companies are helping smaller companies make the capital investments necessary to put in best-in-breed software. Or you may have a small company that is going to a large contract manufacturer who has all the systems in place, but they don't have the know-how or the legal or business savvy to request the things they need to make it an appropriate contract that meets the compliance obligations related to FDA.
And that right there probably leads right into another core competency that you guys have, which is the informatics. So can you speak on that and how you use that to achieve not only growth but also protection for your clients?
Right. So informatics is primarily related to the process control. So in many situations, the key records are still retained or recorded on paper. And so one of the challenges, how do you analyze paper? How do you move the data from paper into a digital format in an FDA-compliant way? So think of it as chain of custody for data, because if we're going to analyze and try to enhance or improve a process or release a batch of goods, you want to make sure that that data is reliable. So we have in the past, and there are systems out there now that we can install that help with this, what we'll call chain of custody or high data integrity related to paper records. And so we get it into digital format, and then people can do troubleshooting. They can do modeling to see where the process is going, or they can do modeling to see what happened to the process and why it failed. So data is really critical, as it is in so many industries. Marketing, which the business you're in, people may see the commercial, but the reality is you need to test the results of the ads and the marketing effort, and its statistics and its analysis to see what works. And when we do that in the process area as well, where we model what will happen based on past results, and then we troubleshoot based on final results to see why, what was the root cause of success or failure. So that's critical. So and part of this is to remain compliant, because the FDA says you have to control the process, and if you have a failure, understand why. And so that's why informatics is so important.
Yeah, I mean, you're almost flying blind unless you're seeing what's being done in information and the visit, from a website standpoint, how many visits and what pages are they going to, but from your standpoint, it goes, well and way beyond that. So I can completely see how analytics is so helpful. Any final thoughts on your process? And then if you could also just give us what's the best way that our listeners can learn more about your business.
Right. Well, I'll mention our formal manufacturing risk assessment. We do this both for product owners that have their own internal or captive facilities, and we also do this audit on prospective contract manufacturers. And we'll go through the production systems and their IT systems, the templates, the agreements that are used to engage customers and contract manufacturers. And we'll also help them design a system to capture the intellectual property that might be created during the process itself. And so that is our manufacturing risk assessment, and it's a comprehensive review of about 1,000 different aspects of that whole relationship. The other thing I'll mention as part of this is that when companies are planning to go public, or they are public, Rule 10b-5 under the SEC regs says that you have to disclose material risks. And so what we do is we try to help companies identify these risks and then, again, leave it to the lawyers to decide whether the business and IT and intellectual property issues that we have uncovered rise to the level of materiality. So interested parties could reach us at the website. You could go to skylandanalytics.net. We have our headquarters in Niwot, and we have several of our associates around the U.S. and Europe that we put on different projects. And really appreciate the time, Mike, and thanks for the insightful questions.
Excellent, Bob. It was wonderful getting to know you and your business, and it just sounds like there's so many moving pieces that are so critical to success in this industry that you need someone like your company on your side. So I encourage everyone to check out your website, and thank you so much for your time, and wish you all the best.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.